Okay, today we're going to talk about rhetoric, which is persuasive language, and there are three devices that we're going to go over: ethos, pathos, and logos. By the end of this video, you should know what those three things are. How do you win an argument? Let's say you believe something. Let's give you a belief. For example, you think that the death penalty is bad. People who have committed horrible crimes should not be killed because that's inhumane. But somebody else over here thinks that, you know what, murderers and rapists and stuff, we should kill them. They shouldn't be in our society. You disagree. So you're going to argue. And as you argue, you're probably not going to change this person's mind. But you might change this person's mind. This is the fence sitter. This is somebody who's not quite sure which side of the fence they're on. And you are trying to get that person down to your side. By the way, this is the exact setup of a court, right? This is maybe the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney, and then both are trying to speak to the jury to get the jury to come on their sides. The jury has been chosen to be unbiased, and it's kind of the way it's been set up. I've had some students in class say, we really should just respect each other's beliefs and everyone's entitled to their own opinions. But there's actually a purpose to persuasion. If it weren't for persuasion, we would not have the suffrage movement and women's right to vote. We wouldn't have abolished slavery. We wouldn't have an America because we wouldn't have persuaded people to have a revolution. Persuasion has led to a lot of social progress and will continue to do that. And for that reason, persuasion is really important. You should absolutely fight for the things that you believe in, and persuasion is your tool to do that. So how do you do it? If you're over here and you're trying to get the fence sitter down to your side, what do? Well, use rhetoric. And rhetoric is, the art of persuasive speaking, language that's persuasive. Let's make it simple. Rhetoric is persuasive language. And a guy named Aristotle knew this. He was a Greek philosopher. And he asked himself, how do you win an argument? And he decided, there are three things you really need. Number one, the speaker needs to have the correct form, a certain manner with which he or she argues. Second, the speaker needs to have a message and idea that makes sense. And third, the speaker needs to connect with the audience. There has to be some emotional bearing on his argument. Let's go over each of those three in a little bit more detail. So the speaker, ethos, and for the image again, this is this person setting him or herself up as an attractive option, as a credible, authoritative option. How do you get this person down to your side? Well, you try to come across like you know what you're talking about. You seem likable, you seem credible, because it is easier to accept an argument from someone you respect. And it's an important thing to ask yourself, what kinds of things do you think will earn you some respect from your audience? And admit that it will be different for different people, but there probably are some consistent things that will tend to earn you respect. Number one is seeming competent, seeming like you are the kind of person who knows what you're talking about. And that goes hand in hand with confidence, right? Number two is seeming fair, like you've considered both sides and you've made a reasonable choice based on what you've learned. Number three is seeming authoritative, like you've really done research. You are an authority figure on this, and you know what you're talking about. You gain the authority and the competency from using reliable sources that made sense, expert testimony, people who know more than you do. This is a big one. Addressing the other side. Most persuasive essays will have a refutation paragraph. You need to address the other side of the argument and explain why it's wrong. Also, using an appropriate tone will help you. So how do you lose it? Well, you lose credibility in a debate or in a paper when you cite biased sources, right? Especially with people who have been well educated. They tend to notice which sources are biased and which are not. And if you're consistently sourcing or citing a biased source, you come across as kind of, not credible. Seeming overly aggressive, calling people idiots for not agreeing with you, that kind of stuff. It's less likely to make you an attractive choice for a jury or for people who are sitting on the fence. Plagiarizing, obviously. Committing grammatical or spelling mistakes. You want to seem educated. And grammar's a very quick way that people judge you. So you want to make sure that that stuff is solid and there aren't a lot of mistakes with your grammar. Having an informal tone is a big no-no. And then as far as logical fallacies, we'll explain those in a little bit, but you certainly lose credibility when you speak illogically. All right, so we just talked about ethos, seeming credible, seeming authoritative. That's step one. Step two is the message itself. You're going to be yelling something up to this person sitting on the fence. An argument. Your reasoning for believing what you believe. And that's logos. That's the message itself. So logos is the message. It's the facts, stats, logic that you're using to convince that person to come down to your side. And certainly it's easier to accept an argument when it's backed up, when there are lots of facts to back up the opinion. What kinds of facts convince people? Well, that'll depend. And it'll also depend on your audience. Can people be persuaded without facts? This is an interesting question. Yes, absolutely, right? Fear, for example, sometimes persuades people to do something. Nevertheless, we should try to be as diligent as we can about supporting our opinions and making sure that the message is as reasonable as possible. And how does it come across as reasonable? Well, by being relevant, right? The proof you're using actually fits the claim. Your facts should be plentiful. You should have a lot of them. And they should be explained. Okay. Using reliable sources, doing lots of research, and explaining your facts will all be great ways of enhancing the message, enhancing the logos. All right. How do you lose logos? Well, by not citing facts, right? This is a big one, again, by citing only one side of the facts. You want to be able to address the counter-argument and prove it wrong, have a refutation. Not explaining how your ideas link together is a big problem. It's going to be hard to follow. The message itself needs to be clear. And then certainly a logical fallacy. Again, that's using fallacious logic or illogic. Kind of circular. Takes away your logic. All right, pathos. Pathos is the audience itself and the emotions that are being used to connect with that audience. So you've established yourself as a credible figure. You've given a message that is reasonable and easy to follow and well connected and well researched, which, by the way, is working together, right? The fact that you've done that enhances your credibility. And now it's going to get to your audience. But that's not enough to have given the audience a great message. You have to show that you know this audience, that you've considered this audience. You've gotten into the audience's head. And the jury will be the same way. You'd want to get into the jury's head, figure out what kinds of things will convince the jury. How do you do that? Let's look. First of all, a way to remember that pathos is emotion. Pathos means emotion, and we can see that from some words that have forms of pathos in it. Empathy is inside emotion, so it's getting into someone's shoes and kind of feeling what they feel. Sympathy is same emotion, so having the same emotion as somebody else to kind of, sympathize with them. Well, that's also circular. And then apathy would be the lack of emotion. All right, is it easier to accept an argument when the speaker connects with your emotions? Probably. When arguing, what kinds of things tap into people's emotions? Again, that depends on your audience. And people certainly can be persuaded with only emotion. So for pathos, you want to make sure the audience feels like you understand them. Using examples that show the human side of things is one really good way to do this. Don't just cite a bunch of facts only. You want to be able to have an explanation that they can relate to. Um, understanding the other side is obviously a big deal. We've talked about that a number of times now, but think about it. If you're talking to this person, it adds to your credibility, your logic, and your pathos by saying, look, I've looked into this. I've done research on this. This is what he's going to tell you. And this is why that message that he's going to be yelling up to you is wrong. It's no good. I know what he's going to say, but this is why it's wrong. So come to me. My side's right. Okay. That adds to your logic. That adds to the pathos because you're seeing things from his point of view. And it's also adding to your ethos that you've thought ahead enough to even do that. It's making you seem like you know what you're talking about. How can you lose pathos? Not seeking to understand the opposing side. Omitting a clear thesis. If your message isn't clear, then it's going to be hard for the audience to follow along. And the so what at the end of the paper, or the call to action at the end of the paper. Again, you need to connect with the audience, tell the audience what to do, right? And then we've kind of alluded to this already. And then a logical fallacy, again, would be a problem in terms of pathos. We did this in class, just so you know. A way to try to remember these three, we just used kinesthetic memorization techniques. So for ethos, Simon said for ethos, kids had to stand straight with their fists on their hips, look up at the sky like they were a Roman god or something, kind of exuding confidence and competency. For logos, students put their fingers on their temple and looked thoughtful like the thinking man statue. And for pathos, students put their hands on their hearts and looked sad. The whole idea here is I just want you to very quickly be able to remember that pathos is emotion, logos is the logic, and ethos is the, we'll say, competency or credibility, or probably the best, authority. Okay. So to sum up, ethos is the speaker, logos is the logic that's being used by that speaker, and pathos is how it's being connected with the audience. If you want to think about in terms of this, ethos is establishing yourself as a credible, likable person. Logos is the message being yelled or written, and making sure that it's reasonable and logical and is considered both sides. And pathos is the attempt of this person to get inside this person's head, to understand what he's seeing, to empathize with this person, which will make the argument far more likely to have an impact. Okay. On the next slides, we'll go through logical fallacies. If you have any questions, email me, and I'll see you in class.